Developing aircraft requires huge expenditure. One company has on a number of occasions bet more than its entire net worth. This company's gambles paid off, and it went on to be an aviation giant. The company was Boeing. In 1952, the company developed a prototype transport plane. They invested $15 million, which well exceeded the company's net worth. If the plane failed, it would have sunk the company. The prototype was to become one of the greatest planes of the century, the Boeing 707. Although Boeing was well ahead technology-wise, their competitors were gaining ground with planes like the DC-8 and Convair 880. Boeing decided to raise the stakes and again took a massive risk with the expenditure of $100 million to build even better aircraft. To increase its market share, Boeing decided that customer service was an important issue. They customized the 707 for different clients. They made special long-range models for Qantas Airways of Australia, and they installed larger engines for Braniff's high-altitude South American routes. The cost of customizing was high, and every version of the 707 was a financial risk. Again, for Boeing, the risk paid dividends as sales of the 707 outstripped the DC-8. This would not be the last time Boeing took such a risk. They did a similar thing when deciding to build a plane that would be far superior to any other passenger aircraft in the world, the 747. During the late 1960s, approximately 50,000 Boeing employees went by the name of the Incredibles. These were the construction workers, mechanics, engineers, secretaries, and administrators who made aviation history. They built the largest civilian aeroplane in the world, the 747. They achieved this in less than 16 months. In the early 1960s, market research suggested that passenger growth would climb dramatically. Pan American Airways president Juan Trippe was especially interested in a plane for the future. He spoke of this interest with Boeing's president William Allen. The two signed a letter of intent to develop the 747. Trippe ordered 23 passenger and 2 freight versions of the aircraft, an order totaling $550 million. Regardless of the Pan Am order, building the plane was a huge financial risk for Boeing. It stretched both airframe and engine technology, and it required Pratt & Whitney, the engine supplier, to quickly develop a turbofan engine powerful and reliable enough to keep the mammoth-sized plane in flight. William E. Boeing was the company founder and owner. As the company grew, he remained as president and chairman of the board from 1916 to 1934. Under his guidance, A garage aeroplane manufacturing business went on to become a conglomerate of air and space-related industries. Boeing sold his interests in the Boeing Aeroplane Company to become one of America's most successful breeders of thoroughbred horses, although he never lost his interest in aviation. Boeing died in 1956. Even in its infancy, the company, and William Allen personally, gained many great achievements. One such achievement occurred in March 1919. Allen and pilot Eddie Hubbard made the first international airmail run when they flew postal deliveries from Seattle to Vancouver. Boeing built numerous models of aeroplanes, but one of the more interesting was the B-9 bomber, which had open cockpits. It could reach a speed of 186 miles per hour, and at that time, of the day by 5 miles per hour. Because fighters were expected to be faster than bombers, the B-9 also inspired the first monoplane fighters. It may interest many people to know that due to a lack of runways and airports, the first big passenger aircraft were mostly seaplanes. As air travel became more popular during the 1930s, one trip of Pan American Airlines asked Boeing for a long-range 4-engine flying boat. Boeing developed the 314, nicknamed the Clipper, after the great sailing ships of the day. Clippers had large windows, dressing rooms, and a dining salon that could be turned into a lounge or bridal suite. The Clipper's 74 seats converted into 40 bunks for overnight travelers, and 4-star catered gourmet meals were served from its galley. Probably one of the greatest achievements of Boeing, which allowed it to become the giant it is today, was the development of the Dash 80. It was the prototype for the 707 passenger jet and the KC-135 jet tanker, and it became the first member of the 700 family of commercial and military jets. "72-year-old William Boeing came back to visit his former company for the rollout of the Model 367-80 on May 14, 1954 at the Renton, Washington plant. His wife Bertha christened the yellow and brown aeroplane with real champagne, and the Renton High School band played the Air Force theme. The Boeing company had invested $16 million to build this prototype for a long-range jet aircraft. It was developed over 2 years in secrecy, and it was designated as Model 367-80 to disguise it as merely an improved version of the Stratofreighter. When the Dash 80 was almost finished, Boeing took another big gamble. They tooled and geared up for a production aircraft, although neither the Air Force nor any airline had placed a single order. Because the prototype was constructed to sell first as a military tanker transport, it had few windows and no seats, but had 2 large cargo doors. A week after its first flight, the Air Force ordered 29 tanker versions, the KC-135. The commercial version, the 707, however, faced tough competition from the Douglas DC-8. Boeing salespeople directed their efforts to Pan American, Transworld Airlines, and large European airlines. On October 14, Pan Am ordered 20 707s. Disappointingly for Boeing, Pan Am also ordered 25 DC-8s on the same day. At about this time, the British had also been trying to get passenger jets into the sky with the de Havilland Comet, but they were experiencing problems. Regardless of this, interest was high in the Boeing product. The Dash 80 was a one-off research and development plane built purely to test the idea of a jet-powered transport. They designed a totally new plane. The wing retained the 35-degree sweep like the bombers. The wing flaps were split to avoid engine exhaust and turbulence. Over the course of its production run, the 707 would be modified into the greatest number of variations of any plane ever built. The 707 entered commercial service in 1958 when Pan Am flew it from New York to Paris in 8 hours and 41 minutes, twice as fast as any propeller plane of its day. Each of its 4 engines was able to produce 13,000 pounds of thrust. The production model 707 had a cruising speed of 575 miles an hour. This was 225 miles an hour faster than its nearest propeller-powered rival. With the 707, Boeing quickly took the lead in jet manufacturing. It was a year ahead of Douglas with its first jet, the DC-8. De Havilland's redesign of the Comet was released to the world a few weeks earlier than the 707, but the Comet could only accommodate about half the number of passengers as the 707. Over the years, the basic design of the 707 was preserved in many of the Boeing jets which followed. The standard fuselage width of the 707 is shared by the 727, the 737 and the 757. By the time its production run ended in 1991, over 1,000 Boeing 707s had been constructed. Boeing has always directed profits to research and development, and this eventually led them to work on space missions. One of the most important early achievements was building the Lunar Roving Vehicle, also known as the LRV, at the Kent, Washington facility in 1969. The first vehicle was delivered just 17 months after the contract was signed. Its appearance resembled a golf cart or a badly stripped-down dune buggy, but regardless of its appearance, it was an engineering marvel. The buggy-like vehicle traveled about 10 miles per hour, carried 4 times its own weight, and had woven wire mesh-like wheels to negotiate the strange lunar surface. More modern exploits of Boeing in the space arena include the 1993 NASA-Boeing contract for the International Space Station, which is the largest international space venture ever undertaken, both financially and physically. It's 2 football fields in size. The Boeing team is charged with design, development, physical and analytical integration, test, delivery and launch of all US elements, including the living quarters, the laboratory module and an airlock. Additionally, the Boeing company directs a national industry team comprising many major US aerospace companies and hundreds of smaller subcontractors. 16 countries are involved in the International Space Station. Aboard the Boeing-built US laboratory Destiny, crew conducts scientific studies in the unique conditions of microgravity, which is an environment that can't be duplicated on Earth. This uninterrupted access to space allows researchers to acquire large amounts of information to confirm new concepts and previously unobserved phenomena. Investigators make multiple experiment runs in succession, obtaining statistically significant results in a matter of weeks, even days, instead of years. The space station statistics are height 143 feet, length 290 feet, width 356 feet. Its weight 1 million pounds and a living and working space of more than 46,000 cubic feet. Amazingly, the Dash 80 remained in service with Boeing for 18 years as a test plane, and in 1972 it was retired and turned over to the National Air and Space Museum. It sat idle in the Arizona desert for 18 years. In May 1990, under an arrangement with the Smithsonian, Boeing returned the aeroplane to Seattle for a full restoration program. A crew was sent to the desert to ready the Dash 80 for its final flight. It was a painstaking task that took 15 technicians 1,000 man-hours to bring the plane back to flying condition. But the desert had preserved the plane well, and the airframe remained in excellent condition. The Pratt & Whitney engines were fired up and tested, and when everybody was sure the Dash 80 was ready, the flight crew boarded and flew her to her birthplace in Seattle, where she was restored and made ready to begin a new life of service. A service of reminding future generations of our steps in achievement of flight. The last step in the restoration program was repainting Dash 80 in her original colors. This was the last time any test would be done on the aircraft. Fittingly, her paint job was a first in the world. It was a test of a new technique and procedure of painting aircraft. Dash 80 is considered by the Smithsonian as one of the 12 most important planes in the history of flight. It revolutionized air travel. The Dash 80 was the plane that tested many of the revolutions we as travelers enjoy today. The Dash 80 established the classic configuration for jetliners to come. It also set speed records nearly every time it flew. Its swept-back wing is used on nearly every plane today. The Dash 80 flew with a fifth engine mounted on the aft fuselage in a program to test the feasibility for a trijet 727. Dash 80 had 3 different types of engines installed at the same time. Dash 80 has approximately 3,000 hours of flight recorded in its logbook. Although it led to a revolution in air transportation, Dash 80 never entered commercial service itself. It was always a one-off development plane. However, the gift of Dash 80 is the birth of much larger, faster and smoother planes that quickly changed the face of international travel. Boeing didn't stop there. They replayed the success of the 707 with the development of the 747 or jumbo jet. Again, the company took a huge risk. The incentive for creating the giant 747 was the falling price of airfares due to competition and increasingly crowded skies. The idea behind the 747 was to move more people in one flight. Boeing had already developed the design concept and had the technology to create the 747 because the company had bid on, but lost, the contract for a gigantic military transport, the C-5A. The 747 was truly monumental in size, and to build, it required a truly monumentally large factory. The massive aeroplane required the construction of the 200 million cubic foot 747 assembly plant in Everett, Washington. This factory is still the largest factory in the world in terms of volume. The first plane was rolled out on September 30, 1968, less than 3 years after Pan Am had signed the letter of intent. Development cost to that time was said to exceed $1 billion, but that didn't include the cost of the world's largest factory. It wasn't smooth flying for Boeing. There were some problems. The prototype 747 was rolled out to an astonished crowd of workers, reporters, and airline executives. While everyone knew Boeing was working on a jumbo jet, no one was quite ready to accept the real size of the plane. The size was in fact the first problem. The first jumbo was overweight by 240,000 pounds. It was estimated in the design to weigh only 550,000 pounds. Regardless of the problems, Boeing worked through them with the same dedication that they had when building the plane. What Boeing had built was an aviation milestone and will probably go down in aviation history as the greatest commercial aircraft built in the last millennium. Join us again on our next search through our brief but fascinating history of flight and aviation. Come with us and meet the people, the planes, and the companies that have created the world's most technologically advanced machines. This week we continue our exploration of Boeing's history. We'll see how two jumbo jets were destroyed in the endeavor to see just how safe a jumbo actually is. We'll also discover how the world's largest factory was built and how previous production set the scene for the jumbo's development. During the early 1960s, the US Air Force asked for tenders to build and supply a big transport. It was believed that Boeing had the edge over its competitors Lockheed and Douglas. However, in 1965, the Air Force announced Lockheed had won the bid with their C-5 Galaxy. But Boeing's misfortune at losing the contract was a factor that assisted them to create the 747 Jumbo. This plane broke nearly every previous commercial aviation record. One example is the Qantas flight on August 16, 1989. A new 747-400, the latest model, touched down at Australia's Sydney International Airport. This plane had just flown 11,200 miles from London in 29 hours, 9 minutes and 5 seconds. This was the longest airline flight in history. The technology Boeing used to build the Jumbo was accumulated over many years, mainly from building bombers for the US Air Force during the war years. One example is the B-29. An American propaganda film claimed there was enough stored aluminium sheeting to lay a silver carpet over every street in Tokyo. Whether that's true or not is hard to determine. Another claim is that there were 50 tons of blueprint drawings created to build the plane. The B-29 could claim a number of firsts in aviation. However, it's the wing that stands out as a milestone in aircraft development. It had a revolutionary set of flaps that occupied about 20% of the total wing area. This reduced the stall speed of the plane, hence reducing its landing speed. The B-29 could land in as much distance as aircraft half its size. Boeing's success is not derived just from flight innovation. The techniques Boeing developed in the building of aircraft is the other ingredient of their success. Shuffling assembled components around the factory floor was time-consuming and space-consuming. Boeing developed the overhead transportation system to speed up production. This system is still used today. The power plant for the B-29 was 4 2200 horsepower engines, which gave the plane an accumulative power of 8,800 horsepower. This gave the plane a flight speed of more than 300 miles per hour. Another revolution was the development in the fuselage. It was pressurized. This allowed the plane to fly at great heights. After the war, Boeing transformed the plane into the Stratocruiser. It's the accumulation of such achievements which allowed Boeing to take future gambles and win. On July 25, 1966, Boeing took on the first physical stage of building the world's largest commercial aircraft. They chose this site to do it. But before the construction of the plane took place, they had to build the world's largest factory. The site is Everett, which is approximately 49 miles to the north of Seattle. A total of 630 acres of heavy forest had to be cleared. More than 250 contractors were required for this operation. More than 2,800 men and just about every construction vehicle were employed. Along with the clearing, a railway was required. It's America's second steepest, and it rises 500 feet in less than 3 miles. The cost of the railway alone was $2 million. Initially, it was used to remove rubbish and supply materials for the construction of the building, and later it would be used to bring in parts and materials for jumbo jets. There were always problems to overcome, but one in particular nearly delayed the project, and it seemed there was little anybody could do about it. It rained for 68 days straight. Machinery and people sat idle, and this was becoming extremely costly. To overcome this problem, Boeing asphalted about 100 acres so that building could continue as planned, regardless of weather conditions. The building was behind schedule, but even that didn't slow Boeing's determination to finish the plane on time. They simply decided to construct the building around the prototype 747. The plane's construction team had to wear hard hats and brave the cold, as the building was still open at one end. What the entire team achieved and overcame was incredible, and that is what they became known as, the Incredibles. As the building of the plane commenced, the train became even busier. Not only was it still bringing in building materials, it was also delivering plane components. The train transported the million or so components right to the factory floor. The factory itself resembled a mini city, 48 acres in size, under one continuous roof. Prior to starting the building, much research and development had to be done to confirm exactly what Boeing wanted to create. Thousands of hours were spent on wind tunnel tests and on paper designs to reduce drag as much as possible. Drag determines the plane's fuel usage, and this equates to money. For the 747 to be a success, it had to be economical to operate. Over the months, many designs were tested, including this double-decker version. Millions of dollars were spent on wind tunnel tests, and every parameter was measured and recorded. In the meantime, a flight simulator was developed to train pilots to fly this Leviathan. The simulator was a TV camera that scanned a detailed and accurate model. The flight characteristics were the tricky part, and the programmers could only set parameters for how the engineers thought the plane would behave. The praying mantis was built to give pilots a hands-on experience in taxiing the plane, 29 feet in the air. Jack Weddall, Qantas's chief test pilot, developed the idea, and with practice he could maneuver the Mantis to within 6 inches of the loading platform. This was a very important test, as it proved that the 747 could be managed at airports without major changes to existing infrastructure. A full-scale mock-up of the 747 was built to test every part and component of the plane. Basically, the first 747 was nothing more than an engineering tool. Components were arriving from contract companies both nationally and internationally. When full production began, all 4.5 million parts had to arrive on time, every time. The logistics were as huge as the plane itself. The mock-up showed the first flaws. Here is the first jumbo coming together. This is the big test as the millions of pieces are assembled. What we're witnessing is theory being tested in practice and a plane becoming reality. The tolerance of the engineering process had never been so stringent in aircraft manufacture. The Incredibles had overcome many obstacles to get the plane to this point, and the tension was heavy, as this was the make or break point of their commitment. Over 75,000 engineering drawings were used, and each assembly instruction had to be followed to the letter. Many systems on the Jumbo were duplicated as backup systems, and to get the plane together for the big presentation day was a colossal job. It was not only the large parts of the jigsaw that had to fit, it was the millions of small pieces that also had to fit and operate perfectly. The first two operational planes were created just to be destroyed in one of the world's most expensive destructive testing exercises. It wasn't smooth flying for Boeing. There were some problems. The prototype 747 was rolled out to an astonished crowd of workers, reporters, and airline executives. While everyone knew Boeing was working on a jumbo jet, no one was quite ready to accept the real size of the plane.
1, 2, 3. Got it? Okay, wait!
The size was in fact the first problem. The first jumbo was overweight by 240,000 pounds. It was estimated in the design to weigh only 550,000 pounds. On February 9, 1969, the second 747 prototype did fly. The second prototype was a leaner version. It weighed 630,000 pounds and was becoming workable. Flights between February and December revealed an engine problem. They were underpowered for the increasing weight and size that had occurred since earlier designs. However, the engine problem hadn't been solved by the time the plane entered service in January 1970. At one stage, Boeing had about 30 planes parked at its plant that could not be delivered until Pratt & Whitney had corrected the deficiencies of its JT90 engine. It took a year before the engine problems were rectified. This is a wing flying for the equivalent of 30 years. This is a wing breaking after being pushed 29 feet upwards. One test saw the tail of the plane dragged along the runway until the plane actually reached its minimum unstick speed. Undoubtedly, the tail wouldn't hit the ground in commercial use. The rejected takeoff test is another interesting experience for the test pilot. The brakes are locked up and the plane is given full throttle down the runway. First, the tires blow, then the undercarriage gives way, and finally, the fire starts. Anti-lock brakes that are now common on cars have been used on the Jumbo from the beginning. Another test is to land the plane with a number of wheels locked up and the remainder left as designed. It also demonstrated what would happen if a braking malfunction occurred. The 707 passed a remarkable test. An underwater tank held an entire fuselage and pressure was exerted on the plane, which was calculated to be the equivalent of 40 years of flying or 50,000 flight cycles. The plane was intentionally damaged in certain areas to see how long such damage could sustain long-term flight. Amongst the final tests of the 707 was the placing of barrels of water in the plane. Barrels were to simulate the weight of 180 passengers or 45,000 pounds of payload. Another 9 tons was added just to see if the plane could sustain such an overload. The total weight of the plane was 360,000 pounds. The ground engineers recorded all the vital statistics of the tests, including the performance of individual components and flight characteristics. Over 35 days of flight tests, the pilots flew the plane from very low levels to very high altitudes at speeds ranging from near stall to over 700 miles per hour. The plane and test results were handed to the FAA for their testing and certification. The biggest compliment to Boeing regarding both the safety of the plane and its capabilities occurred in December 1959, when an Air Force C-17A landed in Rome. The plane had President Eisenhower on board, and he was on a mission called Monsoon. The President was going to visit 11 countries in 19 days. Such a journey on the best plane previous to the 707 would have taken at least a month. This was a clear signal to the world that the jet age was here. In India, Eisenhower visited the Taj Mahal with President Nehru. When he arrived in Athens via Tehran, he had covered the entire rule of Alexander the Great in just one day's travel. He went on through France, Spain and Morocco before returning to the United States. The trip was an absolute success. Huge crowds met him wherever he went, and they also saw the future of flight in the Boeing 707. Today, with planes derived from the 707's remarkable achievements, many people have the opportunity to follow in President Eisenhower's footsteps and travel to places that once seemed so far away. Another milestone for Boeing and its greatest advertisement. The plane that carried the presidents was designated Air Force One, a Boeing 707. These planes carried every president from Eisenhower to Reagan. The saddest moment for this Air Force One was the day it returned the body of President Kennedy to Washington after his assassination. The name Air Force One, passed from plane to plane, is actually a radio call sign and is used only when a president is on board. The VC-137s were fitted out luxuriously, and the seating was for only 22 passengers. They also had advanced navigation and communication systems, but apart from that, the plane was comparable to a commercial airliner. It was so popular that within the first 12 months of service, more than 2 million passengers had been carried. For those days, this was a staggering amount. In Australia, Qantas opened a service from Sydney to San Francisco. This was only one of many new routes that opened up around the world, and it was only possible because of the Boeing 707. Qantas was under much pressure to buy from British manufacturers, but they chose the 707 because Boeing had designed a short-body version of the plane especially for them, so that it could operate from Sydney's short runway and the other short runways of Qantas destinations. Join us again on our next search through our brief but fascinating history of flight and aviation. Come with us and meet the people, the planes, and the companies that have created the world's most technologically advanced machines. That concludes another episode of Flying Through Time. Join us again next when we further delve into our short but colourful history of flight.